I cast you out, unclean spirit, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. It is he who commands you. It is he who flung you from the gates of heaven to the depths of hell. Be gone, in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. The power of Christ compels you. The power of Christ compels you. The power of Christ compels you.
Hey, Jack, is everything okay? I was just on mute.
Stephanie, I saw your hands moving, and I thought there was some fog coming out of your mouth, so I thought you might have been possessed.
Oh no, it's all good. I just had some split pea soup for lunch.
Hey, so speaking of that, why don't you tell us about this movie that we're going to talk about?
Let's introduce the podcast first. So this is The Horrible Idea with Stephanie, that's me, and Jack, who is our exorcist this week. And we will be discussing The Exorcist, released December 26, 1973, directed by William Friedkin, with a screenplay by William Peter Blatty, based on his novel.
Yeah, the budget was $12 million, and the box office was $441.3 million, which, if you look at that in today's money, it is like one of the highest grossing movies of all time. And
it's like Avengers MCU level.
Yeah, and it's still the highest grossing Warner Brothers movie when adjusted for inflation. IMDb gave it an 8 out of 10. Rotten Tomatoes critics gave it an 83, and Rotten Tomatoes audience gave it an 81. This was a movie.
All within the same realm, yeah.
There is more trivia about this movie than any other movie I've looked up in our whole podcast so far. Just pages and pages.
Yeah, it's definitely like the meme. It's definitely like the meme of the guy and girl watching the movie, and the girl is like, "Don't tell me any trivia about the movie," and the guy is like suffocating himself because he really wants to say trivia about the movie.
Yeah. I also watched a documentary about this, which I actually watched before to put off actually watching the movie, because this movie's scary.
Yeah, I think maybe this is one of the ones that scares you more than me.
Probably. We can get into why.
Yeah.
Let's do preconceptions before trivia, because there's a lot of trivia. So what was your experience with this film?
So I saw this when I was 14. I watched it at a friend's house. And we, I had just heard like, oh, it's the scariest movie of all time. And so we watched it, and I was definitely like scared, but I think maybe because I had been so kind of like amped up that it was going to be the scariest movie I'd ever seen. I like actually had a very good time. I wasn't as scared as I think I would have been going in blind. But the scariest part was that there's a scene where there's like a quick flash of like a demon face. And my friend didn't see it.
Oh.
And she swore she didn't see it. And she wasn't the type of person who would just like prank me like that without any, follow through. So like, I really thought like maybe I was going crazy. What about you, Jack?
This is like one of my anecdotes in life is seeing The Exorcist. So I was about 10. We both grew up Roman Catholic. So I saw this like when I was going to Sunday school. And I think I like snuck out of bed late. I was at my father's house, which was a large house, and I like snuck into the TV room, which he had, and I put on HBO, and this was pretty early on in the movie, but not like from the super beginning. And then the really scary stuff started happening, and being 10, I got so scared that I was just like frozen, and so I couldn't like turn off the TV. I was just like watching it in horror. And that stuck with me for a long time. And I remember like just like seeing her face a lot when I was a little kid in like nightmares. And then probably when I was like...
It's a memorable face.
It is. And probably when I was like 20-something, early 20s, I'm like, all right, I'm going to watch this again, and I'm going to like be okay about it. And so I watched actually all three. I watched the 2 sequels. 2 being, I've no idea what 2. 2 is one of the most confusing films ever made, and 3 is a pretty decent film.
Which one has the really scary scene with the nun?
I think that's 3. But anyway, so I was still scared, but less scared, and then I've seen parts of it various times, and then coming up for this podcast, like I said, I watched a documentary, I listened to a bunch of podcasts about it, and then just like today, I just sat down and watched it, and I watched it on my TV.
Oh, you did all of that before you watched it?
I have a TV for the first time in many, many years, and so I watched it on my TV.
What's your size?
I think it's
inch
not
rating?
that big. It's a good size. It's 43 inches.
That's good for The Exorcist. Yeah.
Yes. So, and I have to say, I enjoyed it as a film a lot more this time. I was very aware. A film. A cinematic journey.
Yeah, well, we can get into it later, but I remembered it totally differently. But should we get into the plot breakdown or trivia or?
Sure, let's do the plot breakdown first.
In Georgetown, Washington, in the Georgetown neighborhood of Washington, D.C., wealthy actress Chris McNeil's daughter Reagan begins displaying strange behavior. She can't sleep. She complains that her bed shakes. Later, she disturbs a party, peeing on the floor. After a barrage of medical tests fail to solve or even explain the phenomena, which quickly worsens, Chris is advised to contact a priest. She consults Jesuit priest and psychiatrist, and pugilist, Father Damien Karras, who witnesses Reagan's apparent demonic possession.
Father Karras gets approval from the church for an exorcism and is teamed up with Father Merrin, an elder priest who has traveled the world and performed an exorcism in Africa. The 2 men battle for the life and soul of Reagan. And in the end, Father Merrin dies of a heart attack, and Father Karras attacks Reagan, forcing the entity into himself and then jumping out the window, ending the possession and his life.
Bum,
Maybe?
bum, bum.
Because he's in 3, so that's weird. But
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Yeah, so trivia and thoughts, I think they go together. So I did not realize that Friedkin also directed The French Connection, which is one of my favorite films. And there is like a hyper realism in his work that I really kind of like, with the chases and The French Connection. And
I'm a big fan of his work on Cruising, as well as Killer Joe, both good. To Live and Die in L.A., also good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this and French Connection are probably like his 2 probably top of the line films.
So I feel like a lot of the trivia has been talked about so many times, so I don't think we're going to get too deep into I'll just say there is a mystique about this film. It's said that 7 people died during the production of this film or right after. It's cursed. It's weird.
Yeah. No, I've heard that. All of that is sort of I'm sure if you really dig into it, some of it is debunkable or whatnot, but it's one of those things where you hear 9 people died. No, I heard 10. And right. It just sort of gets passed around and almost mythologized.
Besides that sort of urban legends of horrible things. There were actual horrible things that were well documented because William Friedkin is fucking insane. So apparently he would do things like shoot off a gun to like have the actors be authentically surprised, or he smacked an actor across the face at one point to like get a action out of him. He kind of like talked to the stuntmen, and he would have the stuntmen kind of ignore actors when they said they were hurt.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like there's a lot of directors that sort of just like behave badly in the name of art, and
Sure.
somehow it's okay. Which I do not think would fly as well these days.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting in the documentary, which was this documentary was in the 25th anniversary DVD, and Ellen Burstyn was like, "Yeah, you know, I fell and hurt my back, and I told them they couldn't push me so hard next time, and then they did, and ha ha ha. But I guess it's all for art, and I love Billy anyway," meaning William Friedkin.
Yeah, there was a different calculus, I think, of what you were allowed to complain about at different eras, for sure. Do you want to like go through the story and kind of, because I feel like there's so much to say throughout the entire sort of plot.
Sure.
So, well, I'll start off with I forgot about the whole like northern Iraq portion, or just I guess that it was so long. I thought it was maybe
Yeah.
just kind of like a quick little, oh, they uncovered this artifact, but like he goes for a walk, he like finds another statue, like he goes and like sits at a cafe. Um this movie actually, it just entirely like it starts kind of the actual like active exorcism and really intense possession stuff doesn't start until well over an hour into the movie.
Yeah, they don't even mention exorcism until
Oh
an
yeah, it's
hour
like
in.
the last 45 minutes really is when like the exorcism and all of that starts happening.
Yeah, I didn't remember it being so long too. And I think it's hard. This is one of those movies where like this if you're watching it again, you're so aware of what's going to happen. And so this sort of like, you know, Reagan, the daughter, is super, super sweet. And like her relationship with her mom is kind of very like tender, and they're like
It's very wholesome.
kissing, and
Yeah.
like it's very wholesome and like very sort of normal, like almost like I don't know how to it was not very like Hollywoody. It was just sort of like this sweet family. Um
With
which was
a
ironic because
insanely rich mom. I was like,
right.
she's very wealthy.
Yeah, and then like you know it's going to happen, and so when things turn, you know, it's much more sort of dark. Yeah, so there's that whole Iraq part, and then you know the sort of shot of the statue Pazuzu.
And him like facing off against it, sort of, yeah.
Yeah, that's weird. It struck me much weirder this time because like there's like it's just a statue. Like he doesn't fight a demon or anything. He literally just sees a statue.
Yeah, I guess it's just sort of like a bookend of him facing off against this, you know, because then in the end he faces off against it again. So, but
Right.
in the form of Reagan. Yeah. So, and then there's so much more. It's so surprising to me in some ways, how this has endured and how wildly popular it was at the time for, and I know, you know, obviously film was edited and paced much differently in the 70s, but it's rather slow. It's not like a fast paced, you know, kind of action packed. It's very like deliberate in the character development and in the place setting. And like there's scenes that are just kind of about, you know, Chris O'Neill kind of doing her acting thing or just like taking a call at night that are really just to develop her character. It doesn't really, further the whole possession story or anything. And I do love also that it was shot on location in DC. I lived in DC and the general area for like 11 years. So,
Oh, wow.
and I've been to those Exorcist stairs like so many times. There's like frequently a crowd around them, like people taking photos in the summer by the Exorcist stairs.
Oh.
And the place that Chris O'Neill was renting or owning, whatever she was doing, is very expensive. So, like, those houses are not cheap.
There's a lot of similarities to Jaws for me in this movie. Jaws is a movie that we both have seen many, many times.
Yes.
But, so Jaws came out in 1975. It was also based on a very, like, popular book. So the book, The Exorcist, was published in 1971. And it was sort of weird because William Peter Blatty was mostly like a comedy writer. He was kind of like he wrote like this weird sort of like philosophical humor books, and he was like somewhat popular.
Oh wait, you didn't think this was a comedy? I was laughing.
It's a subtle comedy. But he decided to write this book on this sort of like quote unquote true story that he read about of this boy in Maryland who was possessed. And so it just became this like New York Times bestseller. It became like, the big summer novel, sold 13 million copies. And then, they immediately decided to make a movie out of it. And, that is very similar to Jaws. And then having this sort of auteur director making a really sort of like an evolution in filmmaking to make this movie, this being horror, Jaws being more like also kind of horror, but more like thriller and more of summer blockbuster like this.
Yeah.
And Jaws, unlike this, Jaws is like an unbelievably tight movie where just like it's so well paced, and even now it seems like super well paced. Where this is a little slow in parts, but interesting.
Yeah, and so like basically you get a lot of Father Karras. He goes to New York to visit his mom. She's, sick. He goes to the asylum where she is. He has that very scary nightmare of her coming up out of the subway, and then that's when the flash of the demon happens.
Yeah.
And then she just goes back down into the subway. But there's a lot of character development for him, like him jogging and boxing and you don't sort of like know exactly. I mean, I guess you can kind of assume, okay, he's gonna be involved in the titular exorcism, but he doesn't actually meet Chris or Reagan until I want to say it was like an hour and a half in. It was pretty far in. And after, Chris has taken Reagan to every single doctor in the DC metropolitan area, basically. I love that scene where she's like at the table and there's just like 10 doctors in white coats around her. And she's just like, no, you need to figure this out. Like, I'm not sending her to an asylum. And they do like every test known to man on her. Poor kid.
There was some really cool stuff about, so, it's another sort of popular line about the movie is that, I forgot what it is. It's not an angiogram. It's a arteriogram, I think.
Isn't that? I thought it was an angiogram. We can look.
I think it's an arteriogram. Anyway, whatever it is, a lot of people said like that and the spinal tap were like actually the scariest parts of the movie, for them a lot. But there was a super accurate scene, and then they used the film footage in medical schools in the 70s as like a example of how to like prep someone for that procedure.
Yeah, there's one scene where she's it's like when they brought her back to do a second round of tests, and she's laying on a like sort of a slab with her head in a vise, and there's this camera that's like swooshing. I think it's a camera, X-ray of some sort that's like swooshing about her head. And I've at several different points gone in for a battery of tests for any one thing or another. And I feel I've never done a spinal tap, but I've done things similar to a lot of these tests, like the what are they called when you go into the tube?
An
CT
MRI?
scan. I've done an MRI and a CT scan, and they are horrifying. And then I had to do another one where I was on a slab and they did the swooshing thing. Ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that. It's the inherent scariness of that. And then like the whole time I'm like, she could just like freak out like while this needle is like in her spine. And that's like very scary like idea. It's just like really good tension, really, that I think movies copied so much after that. Like it was this very, a few different people I read said like, this is the turning point for horror. It was like Psycho and then this were like what made American horror what they are, which I found interesting.
Yeah, and like it's also like the effects, like it's sort of like a slow ramp up of the effects and especially the makeup on Reagan, where she begins and she's just Linda Blair. She's just a girl. And then,
Right.
And then she kind of looks tired. They kind of make her look sort of wan and tired. And then, her eyes get kind of cloudy and weird. And then her face gets like that puffy, weird, and it's all black and blue. And by the end, she's completely unrecognizable.
Right.
But once the demon is actually cast out of her, she returns to Linda Blair within like one cut, which is
she's like a little cut up, but mostly fine.
And like however many years later, the effects still work. Like they're not, they didn't look dated to me. Like, and honestly, because it's all practical, I think that really helps.
Right. And even von Sydow, Max von Sydow, he's actually aged up a lot. He's like only like 40 in that or less. So he's sort of, I think I was used to seeing him like that because that's the way he's always been like 70 to me. But he was much younger than he appeared. So his makeup, there is a thing in the 70s where like people have sort of dusty gray hair that it looks like somebody just put some powder in it, which there was a little bit of that.
Yeah.
But interesting makeup note. So apparently Friedkin told the makeup artist, so I want the cuts on her face to look like they were made by the crucifix she was jabbing into her vagina. So
I didn't like that scene at all. I was not pleased by that. So none of those sort of moments were shocking this time, just because I like very vividly remembered them. But I wasn't shocked, but I was surprised. I didn't remember how filthy the language is. Like, it's so filthy, and it's clearly somebody else doing the voice, but you're like, oh, this is coming out of this like 11-year-old girl or however old she's supposed to be. Like,
and so apparently Reagan, what's her name, Blair, she recorded all the voice, she recorded her own voice first and then they dubbed it, but so she said all that crazy stuff at some point.
I thought that, this is where all of the like urban legend comes in. I thought that they had somebody else do the voice. Interesting.
No, they did, but she initially recorded it. This way, it all would sync up with the lips and so on. So someone recorded it, but she said all that stuff
Sure.
originally. So there was a big casting call, especially for Reagan. Jamie Lee, a very young Jamie Lee Curtis, auditioned, and they liked her, but her mother, who is the actress Janet Leigh, refused to let her. A lot of stories like that.
I can't really blame anyone for not wanting their kid to do this.
No.
I mean, apparently, I know I've read that Linda Blair had a very hard time after this movie.
Yeah.
And and
she pretty much only did the other. She did The Exorcist 2. I think she did an Exorcist like spoof, and I think that was about. She didn't do much more.
Yeah, I just know that there was the media was really kind of shitty about her, and there were a lot of rumors of her having mental health issues, and even at some point she had received death threats. There was just a lot of torment for a 14-year-old girl. So I do not blame Janet Leigh at all for not letting Jamie Lee do this, but she got her turn in Halloween later. So
a fact I liked is Ellen Burstyn agreed to do the movie only if her character didn't have to say one of the scripted lines, which was "I believe in the devil," and the producers eventually agreed to eliminate that line from the script.
I wonder why.
I don't know, but that's an intense fact for me.
Yeah, I'm just she says so much other batshit stuff in this movie. And she
yeah,
I mean, there's a case to be made that some of the performances in this are a little cranked up. And I don't know. I just feel like at times, I know that obviously she's supposed to be going through something no one can comprehend, but especially against the sort of very grounded and calm and very natural performance of Father Karras, Chris O'Neill seems very amped up and a little pitched up. There's also a very weird commentary at certain parts where that this is somehow Chris's fault because she's a working mom, which is awkward. One of the doctors is well, have you thought about not working or something like that?
Right. And then, yeah, or because they got divorced and the father. It's interesting that they try to contact the father for her birthday and they can't. And they actually never contact the father throughout the entire movie, which is kind of interesting.
Well, he's in Italy. I know that was the thing because she's I'm
right.
trying to call him. He's in Italy.
Yeah, I thought there would at least be a phone call at some point, but that I found really interesting.
She just
Another
forgot.
thing, and I'm sort of stealing this from the Rewatchables because it was brought up there, but then I started seeing it everywhere, is the party that they had. So they have this big party, and it's a super fancy party. But if you look at the people at the party, it's such a weird combination of people because there's at least two priests, and then there's some foreign businessmen, and there's movie directors, and there's actors.
So I think the priests are supposed to be, because they're in the movie, because there was when they're filming that movie scene in the beginning, when she kind of says I don't know, she makes some joke with the director, and then you see these two priests, and they're ha ha ha. And I guess if they're filming on the Georgetown campus, there are a lot of priests marching about over there.
True. But I think it's also a sort of, not just a horror trope, but a 70s movie trope of this big party with this seemingly random swath.
Oh yeah,
of
that's how
people
rich
from,
people parties
different
are, Jack.
classes.
Yeah.
quarantine hit me because I'm like, I want a party where there's just
Yeah.
like a priest and like, some kind of like Italian businessman, and
Oh my
I
God.
could just.
So on that note, why don't we get into the favorite characters? Because this party scene had one of my favorites, which is the film director. I don't actually know his name, but he is so much.
Yes.
He's a lot when he's just doing the movie scene in the beginning with Chris, where she's like questioning kind of the motivation of one of the characters with him on set, and he's like, what, do you want me to bring in the writer? And she's like, no, like, and then doesn't one of them makes a joke about like, nah, he's fucking somewhere or something like that. And I was like, what is happening? And then at the party he's like wasted, and he like goes out the door, and then he's like, I'm okay. And I thought he was gonna like barf, but he didn't. He just kept going. Anyway, he is doing the most. But I think as far as favorite characters, I really love Father Merrin. I love Max von Sydow. He's just got such a good face, and he was really well cast in this because he had sort of just like had a long career of movies where he is, either a religious figure or he's adjacent to a religious figure. He was in The Seventh Seal, and I know there's another one, The Virgin Spring, and so it really just felt like pitch perfect casting. And you also, like, when he's brought in at the end, and you had seen him kind of in the beginning, you're like, oh, okay, this guy knows what's going on here. And like, it's sort of the first time where you're like, you have, I don't know if it's hope, because it's a pretty dark scenario, but you're like, okay, someone is going to believe that what we're believing, which is, we're believing that the devil has possessed this girl. And even like Father Karras is still sort of, doubtful throughout most of it. But once Father Merrin's brought in, you're like, oh, okay, like, they've got a plan, at least. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I liked him too. I liked Father Karras a little more, and it's a super interesting story about. So Jason Miller plays Father Damien Karras, Demi, and he was not really an act. I mean, he was a trained actor, but he was a playwright who had won a Pulitzer Prize, and I don't know if it was Friedkin or the author saw him and they were like, this guy would be perfect. Or they saw one of his plays and they were like, this guy gets it. And so, yeah, he like, I don't think he'd ever been in a movie before, and they just put him on. And I don't think he did a lot of movies afterwards. He did The Exorcist 3, which was like 15 years after. But yeah, there have been other. This is sort of like a weird trope of like the boxer, the priest who used to be a boxer. That's such like a interesting turn. But he's the priest. He's the boxer who became a priest, who became a psychiatrist. And he's like,
there's a lot of commentary on how like, oh, you could have been friggin' rich, but instead you're a goddamn Jesuit. Like, there's like,
they sent him to Harvard. They said he sent him to Harvard and then like Bellevue and then some fancy medical school. But he's like a man of God and a man of science, and he's got a tight body. And he's a hard drinking, hard smoking exorcist. He
Yeah.
also so he
He's kind of an
exercises.
erstwhile exorcist because he's not like when it's first brought to him by Chris, he's like, nah, nobody's done that since like the
He's like,
1600s.
I love that he makes the joke. He's like, oh, she's like, who would I see about getting an exorcism? And he's like, well, the first thing you need is a time machine. And she's like, what? She's like, my daughter's
Yeah, that's the
dying.
1600s comment. Yeah, because he's just like, no, that's fake, and that's what I mean as far as like, because you're with Father Karras, like he's already sympathetic, and you really believe in him, but I feel like the movie needs someone who has like the kind of determination and the zeal to actually like go ham on this exorcism, like in the case of Father Merrin.
Yeah.
And even
But
though
then,
like,
but then
and
Marin,
even though Father Karras in the end, like he finishes the deed, you know, Father Merrin, the two of them, it wouldn't have worked with either one just doing it by themselves. It really required that team up.
One of the other casting choices I thought was really funny was somebody wanted Jack Nicholson to play Father Karras, and everybody was like, no one would believe that Jack Nicholson is a priest.
That's really funny. I just rewatched The Departed yesterday, so he's very fresh in my mind as a very not priest-like character, but probably still Catholic since he's supposed to be an Irishman in Boston.
Sure. Yeah, and pretty much I thought the whole cast was really great. Ellen Burstyn was great. Linda Blair was
Linda Blair's
tremendous.
great. Yeah. My only like dubious one is that director, because I feel like at times he kind of was in a different movie. Like,
it was funny though, and then they don't even sort of. There were some things that were very interestingly not shown, like so the director, I guess, after the party or something dies, but they don't show that in any way.
Does he?
The cop just. Yeah, he's the one whose head was turned around 360 degrees. And so that's why the cop is like interviewing the mother and
I had a hard time keeping track of the names and like that's the other thing. I had a hard time believing that like Ellen Burstyn would be into this guy.
Right.
Which it's like alleged she is.
Yeah.
I like think the daughter thinks she is.
I think as Reagan read it like in a tabloid or something was because she found the tabloid in the bed. Sure, I just literally watched this like 20 minutes ago.
No, me too. I just like some of that early stuff is a little not super clear. And especially like the names, like I could only remember the 4 key names. There were all these like the maid and the butler and all those people. I was just like, I have no idea who any of these people, what their names are. And I don't think you need to, like,
No.
But
did this one hit you weird? Because like for the amount of time that the movie is and the amount of time they like devote to the family and like the normalcy, they don't really. So the transition between like normalcy, everything's normal, and then one day she gets like a call at night and the daughter's like sleeping in her bed and she's like, why aren't you in your bed? And she's like, my bed was shaking. And then she's like, they immediately take her to the doctor and start doing tests. Like there's not really any other
it seemed like there was something else going on because they had said, I think she said before that, like, the doctor said it's just nerves, you just have to take your medication. As if she had been having some sort of issue already.
Right, and it's mentioned that she's been lying a lot, and it's not like, it's very sort of vague, like.
Yeah, it seems like it's sort of supposed to be like she's had some sort of like difficulty, and I think in that way it sort of grounds you in anyone who's their mom is like mega famous, their parents are divorced, they're moving around. There's
Right.
like a bunch of things happening. So it's very normal that she might have nerves or have a hard time sleeping. And then she also has this like imaginary friend who she plays the Ouija board with.
Mr. Howdy.
Mr. Howdy. And so these things are just like a little creepy. So then I feel like it's actually pretty successful when the actual ramp up into full-blown insanity happens, because you're like, okay, there's already something a little bit off here. And I think it also feeds into, and we can get to tropes, the trope of like sort of, you know, kind of the more vulnerable among people that are being possessed. Like, you know, the mom in The Conjuring who's sort of, you know, she's having a hard time. The little kid in Insidious. Like, that people who are sensitive or having sort of stress or anguish are more susceptible to things like, you know, possession and the devil and all that.
Yeah, I think like vampires, like a lot of things, there's a very interesting like the mythology of exorcism when you like take all the movies that were about exorcism and you sort of like see what is in common with all of them. And then, you know, that's like what that is the exorcism. That's like the demon possession mythology now. Like what all of those have sort of like put together. And part of that is like, yeah, you're like, maybe you're a little psychic, you're a little messed up, and so those demons jumping right in. Other horror tropes, there are noises in the attic, which doesn't really go anywhere, but, you know, it's just like scary.
Yeah, and it definitely doesn't sound like rats to me, but I guess that's the only kind of possible conclusion you would jump to. Not like there's a demon rattling around up there.
Well, I would have said maybe like it's a possum or something like that, but I don't know.
Sure.
It's Washington, D.C., so who knows? Maybe it's a Republican.
We have big rats down there.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Creepy child. She wasn't that creepy in the beginning, but, you know, it's that sort of... Like...
By the first time I got creeped out was with the Ouija board, because then she started talking about Mr. Howdy, and she did kind of get the little, I forget what it's called, the little mover thing. She like whipped it over to her, which was definitely not normal. Yeah. But yeah, creepy children. There's definitely creepy children in Insidious, in The Conjuring, in Poltergeist. There's
Poltergeist,
a lot. Yeah. Friggin' Carol
Yeah,
Ann.
I mean, yeah, she was a lot less creepy than Carol Ann, which was actually made it much more dramatic because, like, even with the Ouija board, like she was very sweet and sort of like curious with the Ouija board. It's called a planchette. You know, she was just like, "Oh, this is a fun game that I play," and she's like, "Oh, I want you to play, but I guess Mr. Howdy doesn't want you to play," which is
he doesn't want to talk about how pretty you are.
Right. I feel like the hard drinking priest is a trope. You know, like. Seen that in a couple of different things. Demons that talk backwards. Sure.
Yeah. My favorite was an intro in the Middle East, or some other sort of quote unquote exotic country, like Hellraiser, where they're like in Morocco, finding some sort of like antique.
Yes, that will bring misfortune. The big fancy party as like the sort of like turning point of the thing. That's in lots of stuff, including Hellraiser. But yeah, it didn't feel. The movie did not feel cliche at all. If anything, it felt like the origin of many cliche things that would come.
Yeah. Well, and then of course there's, and we haven't talked too much about it yet, but there's the actual exorcism, which isn't a trope. It's just like an action, but it's in a lot of other horror movies. It's in The Conjuring. It's in a way in Insidious. And also Poltergeist, like when our girl cleans the house but doesn't really clean it. Um, but I really love this exorcism scene. Like all of it's so intense, and both priests have such good like voices. Like Max von Sydow has a very like kind of deep voice, and then Father Karras has sort of it sounds sort of gentle, but it's very right. At that point he's very like resolute and sincere, and the combination of the two of them through that whole scene, and just Regan like rising up, and with the holy water, it's like very intense. And I think this scene is the reason why, back in the Conjuring episode, I was saying how I like an exorcism. I think it's like a really potent device to use in a movie.
Absolutely.
And, this is the origin of it really on screen. So.
Right. Yeah. And, their voices being different, but sort of complementary. Also that like Max von Sydow is like kind of old, and he's like literally like taking heart pills between takes.
Yeah.
And then Father Karras is like this super virile boxer, like strong guy. So that's like a good combination. You have like this wisdom, and then you have like this sort of like new mentality. And yeah, it's interesting that like as devout as you are and as wise as you are, in the end, Father Karras like took a 12-year-old girl, threw her on the floor, and beat the shit out of her. And that was how he solved the problem.
Yeah, well, and, again, like, without Father Karras's, like, knowledge and belief and zeal, they wouldn't have been able to get to that point. But his body wouldn't have been able to hold the demon, right. He had the heart attack, but Father Karras was able to hold it long enough, and he kind of fought it long enough to like make the choice to jump out the window, because the demon wanted to kill Regan, but he like kind of fought it back, and you see his face kind of change back to normal before he like throws himself out the window.
Right. I thought that was great. Also, I didn't get this, but then I read a bunch of stuff, and then it made a lot of sense. So there's a couple of lines where it seems like the demon's plan is to go into Karras, because Karras is like strong and like a better vessel for him. So there comes a point where he first goes in, and there's like that sort of like who are you in there? Why don't we introduce ourselves? And he's kind of playing it pretty well. And then the demon is sort of like, he's like, oh, so you want there to be an exorcism? And he's like, oh yes, I'm excited about it. And he's like, why? He's like, I think it'll bring us closer together.
Yeah, like you can join us. Yeah.
Well, she's like, he's like, bring you and Regan close together. He's like, no, you and me closer together.
Yeah, and like he's clearly like the Pazuzu is trying to like break him down emotionally. He keeps referencing his mom, and then like speaking in her voice, and clearly trying to lower sort of his defenses so that he can kind of take over him as well. Yeah.
And that was one of my favorite parts of the exorcism, is when they're, so they're reading the parts, and there's sort of like a call and repeat, like all sort of church services. And there comes points where Karras is kind of like just in utter shock. And Max von Sydow, Karras just like, come on, read your part. Snap out of it.
Yeah, I know. He's like, and then he's like, because he's just, that's the thing, is that like, Father Karras kind of is still being convinced and kind of shown the like severity of the entire situation throughout the whole scene.
Yeah.
He's already like believing, but it just keeps crashing down upon him even further through the whole thing, and he plays that really well.
Yeah, and when he sees it really getting to when Max von Sydow sees it getting to Father Karras, he's like, "Get out, just leave. You can't do this anymore." Well, we've gone almost an hour, so I think we could just go to final reactions.
Yeah, I think that's fine. What are final reactions? I think we've talked through most of the plot, and we've arrived at the end of the stairs. What are your thoughts, Jack?
It very much struck me this time around as like a remarkably well-made film. Like it is just like, it is well shot, it is well lit, it is, the effects, the acting, like every part of this movie is like a really good movie. And it really sticks with you. I mean, the visuals are just like, they're not only part of like American culture now, but they just they impact you. And I was watching it with a lot of childhood trauma sitting next to me, but I was able to enjoy it, which says a lot about something so sort of scary, that I was able to enjoy it. So I'm going to give it a scare factor of 9, because there were some parts that are sort of the scariest parts that are also ridiculous and funny. Yeah. Because it is a 14-year-old girl like screaming obscenities and sticking her mother's face into her crotch. Which is why I give it a 9 for scare factor and a 9 for entertainment factor. How about you?
So, like I said, I watched this when I was, I think, 14. I haven't watched it since. I've probably seen clips of it here and there, just on, like, I don't know, as part of kind of clip shows or whatever. But I hadn't seen the thing in full, and I forgot kind of how much of it wasn't sort of how much it is sort of like an art film in a lot of ways throughout the whole. It's not just sort of a exploitative horror movie of the 70s, in the same way that like even something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or something of that kind is. It's far more kind of deliberate and sort of slow paced and beautiful in a lot of ways. And the fact that it does have that slow pace, I think, at the beginning adds to kind of the tension, the drama, the horror of where things end up in this very just incredibly extreme, heightened, terrifying, like, battle of, it's a really epic battle at the end there.
Absolutely.
And so, I watched this for the first time while I was actually attending Catholic school, so it was, very potent then. And I, as far as scare factor, there are definitely movies that have made me jump more, that have kind of made me feel more like kind of scared as I'm watching them. But this is one of those movies that sticks with you, as you were saying. And just also the fact that it was based on a true story. There isn't, it almost plays as sort of like a mythical story. And it's kind of translated that way on the screen, especially watching it now, 50 years later. It's intense. So I think if I'm going to give any movie a 10 out of 10, it's going to be this. Like, it's very foundational. And it kind of sets the mold for so many other things, like movies that we've watched as part of this podcast. Like we've referenced The Conjuring, the James Wan movies. There's a lot of even the exorcism in Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers, when Gandalf casts Saruman out of King Theoden of Rohan, which I just watched in theaters, so it's top of mind. But even things like that, it's coded in a lot of the same ways as this exorcism, this film. So it's just massively influential. So it gets a 10 out of 10 for me in both categories.
Amazing. Yeah, and just to what you were saying at the beginning of that, yeah, I think it's really from like that sort of New York or whatever, like the film school of like the 70s auteur film school. It's like a Scorsese. It's like a,
I like how you put your Italian accent on that.
Scorsese.
It's like a Scorsese.
Yeah, it's a great movie. And what is our next movie?
Oh, we didn't even mention the score. Do 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 do.
Oh, that's right. Tubular Bells. So what's up next for us?
Join us next time when we'll be talking about Guillermo del Toro's 1993 vampire flick, Cronos. And in the meantime, give us a review on Apple Podcasts. We're also on Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you can find podcasts. Don't be scared. Reach out.
If you have any interesting facts about Cronos or The Exorcist, or if you are possessed, or if you have a movie suggestion that might scare us, let us know on Twitter. Email us at thehorribleidea@gmail.com. And remember, the power of Christ does compel you to rate and review us.